Hello, I'm Electra Frost and welcome to an Accountants on Chain webinar today with Elizabeth Morton from RMIT, a tax lecturer, lecturer and also part of the blockchain hub at RMIT. And she's here today to talk to us about our audience here today are accountants and tax agents, tax practitioners, might be some BAS practitioners who are facing new and different kinds of arrangements in crypto with their clients that they can be quite challenged to deal with. And so we're all in the same boat this year, seeing a lot more crypto activity and really questioning whether we're prepared to deal with it in many cases. And Lizzie at RMIT has been researching this. Her background is as a small business tax practitioner, and now she's in academia and doing some really wonderful work for the next generation, teaching the next generation of tax practitioners to deal with, you know, the changing business landscape with emerging technologies and blockchain, and also considering the position that we're in as tax practitioners, where there's there's not much clarity around the tax and dealing with our clients. And so, Lizzie, thank you very much for joining us today, and take it away. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Electra. So, yeah, welcome to be, I feel very welcome here today. I feel like I'm a little bit out of whack because of some technical issues at the start, but glad that we were able to fix that without too much delay. So thank you so much. So yeah, as Electra's already indicated, I'm at RMIT. I have essentially two main hats. I'm the coordinator and lecturer of the undergraduate taxation course within the business stream, and I'm also a research fellow for the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub. So essentially my research crosses over between the crypto activities going on, tax competencies, ethics, and how that all works together. So I'm really interested, particularly with my background as a tax practitioner before I entered into academia, about how that's going to play out and all the challenges at the moment faced by practitioners in this really interesting and evolving space, and certainly seeing its up and downs, particularly this year as we've seen a lot of negative attention through a lot of dramas that have been ensuing, and as a consequence putting at risk a lot of investor funds, really. So there's a lot of happenings going on that are really relevant, and no matter if there's good news or bad news from a tax practitioner point of view, what really comes to the crunch is the need to actually enable the tax compliance work for taxpayers, but also reflecting on the taxpayers themselves, that perhaps are even using my tax themselves to lodge their own compliance obligations, that this is a really complex area, that even tax practitioners aren't necessarily in agreement with how the traditional tax principles are playing out. So through my role, I'm into linking my hats at RMIT, and really seeing a really interesting time to be a tax practitioner, but also a student studying to be an accountant, whether they go into tax or not specifically. So this is a really important area, regardless of whether you might think it's a fad or whether you think it might, die off in a year or two. I think there's growing interest and growing credibility in the space, despite this problematic period of time where we're experiencing a lot of hacks, a lot of court cases, a lot of dramas that get a lot of news media. But it's really an interesting time to be learning taxation and also having to deal with the complexities and grey areas of law. So for better or worse, the ability for us to actually explore this really needs to be front of mind, depending on, of course, the firm you might operate in may or may not have a lot of clients in it, but certainly from that point of view, there's the statistics are showing potentially 1 in 4 taxpayers in Australia are actually holding or have held crypto. So from that point of view, the likelihood of increasing amounts of firms having clients with tax with crypto activities is certainly growing. Electra, I'm hearing the little beeps. Is that
that's just people wanting to enter the room?
Okay.
I'm putting them in. They're still filtering in.
Excellent. As long as it's not a question being raised.
No. What we'll do with questions is we'll just break when Elizabeth needs a breather, and,
yeah, excellent.
but mostly at the end, I think.
Excellent, excellent, and happy to take questions as needed too. So this
I'll just mention, just for questions, just write them in the chat box, everyone, and I'll bring them up for Elizabeth at a suitable time. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So what I'm going to be talking today about is largely a project that I've been undertaking with some colleagues, both at RMIT and also Swinburne University, about the competencies and experiences tax practitioners are having in this space, and essentially the learnings and the issues that are clearly arising from this. But obviously, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded land as part of the RMIT community we conduct business, and also the traditional custodians and ancestors of the land and water across Australia where we conduct our business. So just paying respect to those elders past, present and emerging, just as a opening for that. And I'd also just like to flag that this is, of course, a general presentation, and it doesn't constitute legal or tax advice. So just be mindful to do your own research and such with that regard. So this is not going to be a presentation going into the depths and darkness of all the tax issues. This is more about the practitioner and the role within this space. So I'm not going to do a huge amount of background of what blockchain is, those specific tax issues, but looking at how that holistically operates within the tax profession. So just flagging, though, that this is a contemplation here that blockchain isn't just cryptocurrency. So this is not just a story about Bitcoin as an alternative means of payment, and the concerns of legality of the activities therein. It's something much bigger. So it often can be described as something from this that's something I just simply don't understand, that it's administrative economic infrastructure, that it's the true beginning of the digital economy, or a new architecture of trust, or the evolution of the internet itself. So that Web3 consideration. And over time, we've seen shifts in technology from Web 1, Web 2 to now Web 3. And obviously, the dramas and the attention and the concerns have obviously developed over time. So we're sitting in a time where this is something quite novel and new developing. We're seeing a lot of entrepreneurial experimentation, and with that, a lot of crashes and burns and things like that, hacks and so forth. But there's certainly a lot of positivity in what blockchain can offer here, and really the ability of a much more connected consensus mechanisms and shared data being those core kind of components there. And it's also important to reflect that there's different layers that form part of the technology, and we can have discussions that kind of range over those spaces, and the issues and questions that arise and the interrelationships between those are obviously quite different, and each has different issues and that we need to be mindful of. So I'm not going to worry too much, but beyond just reflecting that this is a social space, this is about an institution growing out of the connectedness of people, particularly those that have a tech-savvy background, that are actually experimenting and creating new communities, new types of forums, new kinds of business operations, and projects in this space that are not restricted by a particular jurisdiction. And obviously, from a regulatory point of view, that raises a multitude of issues. And it's really important to note that whilst we've had a lot of dramas over particularly the last few months, this community actually wants regulation. They want that regulation to come in to ensure that there's things like investor protection, that they can be legitimate competitors or legitimate partners with existing institutions, existing firms, existing elements, and that the future of the economy, the future of business, there's a lot of opportunity in this space, and it's about finding really promising avenues to actually achieve that. So it's really that new digital economic infrastructure that's playing a part. So this is not often the conversation is limited to Bitcoin, for example, but there's certainly much more, and there's certainly a wide range of use cases in this space. And obviously, from a perspective today, we're looking at the implications from the assets, the arrangements that taxpayers may be entering into, rather than other uses that are more broad. However, those broader uses have obviously the implications flowing on that from a taxing point of view, from a GST point of view, withholding tax, royalties, the legislative framework, the characterization of the business itself. Is it a partnership? Is it a company? There's a whole range of issues that stem from this technology because of what can be done with it. And so it's a really, a really big box to open and explore here. And so be mindful that it's a really interesting developing space that, yes, there's obviously been some problems, particularly of late, and that will help grow it. That will help determine how it can be used, how it can be regulated, the important elements to be mindful of, and such. And this is just a couple of examples. If
Oh dear, it seems like we've had a freeze. Can everyone hear me? Just mention in the chat. Lizzie might have had her session frozen. Can everyone hear me?
project. Oh, good, Electra, you started the recording again. I wasn't quite sure if you had.
Sorry about that. It's just the day for it. My computer just crashed and I had a lot of restarting, and so we lost the recording. I'm sorry.
Oh, you lost the full start. That's okay. I'm only just getting into the juicy stuff of the project. So
no, we'll make a recording from now, and to make up I'll write a very nice article from the transcript to bring everyone up to speed who couldn't be here today. Okay.
Excellent. It is. Today's just been the technical drama day. I've had a fairly good run so far, and then as soon as you get on the spot, you end up, you kind of, what am I doing? What am I pressing? So that's okay. We can fumble around. So as I said earlier, involved in a project. So led by myself, but also with Associate Professor Gillian Vesti and Dr. Lan Yuan, as well as Associate Professor Ken Devos, particularly for the second stage of this project. So we're really responding to the issue about the level of technological understanding and skill sets needed by the practitioners to serve clients who make use of blockchain technology. So this has been an issue that's been relevant and identified as a problem area for quite a while. And as practitioners, being in the thick of it, this will probably be really front of mind and an obvious concern for you, because you're actually starting to see this in practice over the last particularly 12 months. And this to note here, this is a project funded by of Australia and New Zealand. So I just want to highlight the gratitude we have to that support. But highlighting the issues here is the fact that as a practitioner, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have to produce compliance work for taxpayers. You have to advise them, whether it's GST or income tax or other, it doesn't really matter. This applies to everything. But often you're in a position where you're not really sure how to apply the tax principles. The legislation may be outdated in some respects, or just not clear. I know when you put a group of tax practitioners in a room together, there can be debate over the particular blockchain activities a client might be up to, and then there may not be an easy answer here. The ATO has been described as having limited guidance, and I know they've put a lot of effort in recently to update that guidance, but it's certainly been described as problematic from that point of view. And often private binding rulings are a complex process to go through to obtain a little bit more certainty, and often it's quite a conservative position.
I imagine they'd also have a bit of a backlog with private ruling requests at the moment too. So, you know, by the time you
Yeah.
get an answer 6 months down the track, perhaps.
That's it. And, you know, so it's that timing. So lag not only with the regulation catching up, but even to get those processes from an ATO perspective completed when you know you've got deadlines for various submissions, you know, thinking again whether you're talking GST versus income tax. And it's this, and just looking at the chat box, yeah. So the code of conduct applies whether it's crypto or CGT or FBT. So as a tax practitioner, regardless of what area you're doing, you need to be competent in that. You need to take reasonable care. You need to know the client affairs. And so we're examining the crypto space when not only is it novel in the technology sense, but novel from a practitioner point of view and what you actually need to know, and can be challenging to fully understand the protocols, all those ins and outs. It's essentially a new can of worms being opened here. And so this is obviously going to have implications for the necessary skills and roles, and going forward, things like concern over getting adequate continuing professional development so that you can at least feel confident that you can serve the clients that are engaging in this space. And as I've noted here, the implications for higher education as well. So at the moment, we're doing a couple of things. So we've completed semi-structured interviews. We've currently got a survey out in the wild. So we're hoping we're going to get enough responses over the next month to really do some really robust analysis there. But we're also doing document analysis. So over the last few years, there's been a fair bit of activity in this space, and putting that all together. So examining the state of play, we're understanding the issues that practitioners are actually facing, and how that links to the technical skills and knowledge required. So this is essentially the findings that we've developed from our interviews and that have fed into the current survey that's currently out. And there's some really interesting insights, some of which are fairly straightforward and probably fairly obvious, and others are obviously raising some interesting questions that we're following up on. So with breaking down these findings, we've kind of broken them down into 6 core themes, 3 of which are really about the context in which we're operating. So the crypto economy and client base, the complexities in tax treatment and the regulatory framework, and then looking more specifically about particular issues and how they fit within the themes of the code of conduct. So the tax practitioner skills and competencies, applying the law, acting lawfully in a certain client's affairs. And these are obviously overlapping to a certain extent because of the very nature of these kind of issues. There's often elements that cross over between issues. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide and break down each of these elements. So looking generally at the crypto economy and client base from the discussions with practitioners, and it'll be interesting to know if this is what you're experiencing as well. So if you've got a client base, feel free to indicate how well this maps to yours in the chat, to keep it a little bit light and discussion based. But generally, we found that it's predominantly younger demographic, and I know that a recent media release just out today, I think, indicated similar, and I think a number of surveys has done that found that as well. But often younger males, and often they're a little bit more risk taking, and so I just want to pause here for a moment, because if we're dealing with a younger, so we could be, 18 to 30-year-olds, thinking about there being the next generation of the economy, of tax practitioners, of whoever, whatever kind of community we're looking at, it's really important that they're now exposing themselves potentially for the first time to tax obligations, particularly if you're thinking about 18-year-olds. They may be just moving out of home or going to university, thinking about have they had much exposure to tax compliance and how much education the generation has had. And is this going to be a positive or negative exposure to the tax obligation, the tax system in Australia, and thinking about the ramifications of that. When I was working at a roundtable earlier this year, one of the key issues that came up was the concern about the next generation of innovators and having that experience early on being really negative to their perspective on government of the tax system, and thinking about, well, thinking about that younger generation potentially doing these activities just for a bit of fun, just for a bit of curiosity because they're tech savvy, and then all of a sudden having unexpected tax obligations, and thinking about, are they even aware of those obligations, or will they only be when they're audited or when the ATO sends them a letter? And the ramifications of that are quite interesting to pull apart.
So say that, the typical 18 to 21-year-old doing a tax return with an agent for the first time, it being a really difficult and expensive experience, might deter them from wanting to engage with the tax system again.
Yeah, that's it. And thinking about Adam Smith's notion of what a good tax system is, it needs to be simple. It needs to promote compliance. And if we're in a situation where it's really challenging and it looks like it's going to be messy, horrible, and potentially expensive to them, are they going to actually comply? Are they going to actually submit their return? And that's a common theme that we've been finding, even having informal chats around that. If there's if it's put in the too hard basket, is it anything being submitted at all? And that's a biggest concern. And you putting aside tax practitioners for a moment and think about those that are using My Tax. I just shared on Twitter today a link from Accountants Daily highlighting the same issue: complexity of crypto with self-lodgement using My Tax. There's a lot of concern about them getting it wrong because even the tax practitioners are struggling to get it right, and are highlighting issues and really advocating for the ATO to guide, for the government to recognise the challenges. And I'm just noting Nola on the chat talking about the pre-filling. Yeah, so, and often at the moment, the inclination here is the ATO are collecting a lot of data. They're still working out how to do it, particularly when it comes to NFTs. And importantly, what they're flagging is fairly minimal on a pre-fill report, simply that it's flagging that there is some kind of crypto activity. But whether the accuracy of that is of concern has also been pointed out, and the tax practitioners in some instances having to really spend time to determine whether that is actually a correct assessment there. And in some instances it hasn't been. But obviously from an ATO data matching point of view, I think there's a real focus on anti-money laundering, the criminality element with that data matching. We only need to look, for example, at the US with their efforts of Tornado Cash in recent days, as an example. There's, at the moment, the government is really about investor protection, but they're also obviously ATO flagging the need to get that crypto compliance right. So it's a hard balance there, but getting back on track though, because I'm a little bit getting off track a little bit. It's easy to kind of just have a general chit chat, but going on to that general crypto economy and client base, moving on from the actual demographic, what kind of came up is the theme that blockchain can be lucrative, but often a lot of taxpayers, the clients, are actually dabbling in this space, and it's almost equivalent to gambling. So they might be, instead of buying a lottery ticket, they're instead going and putting in $20 into crypto. I can do a separate presentation on the complexity of tax compliance when you simply muck around with $5 and put that into some DeFi activity.
Also described as experimenting. I mean, people want to learn to navigate this space because they know it's going to be the future internet, and money's going to be different in the next few years.
Yep, exactly. So
it might be gambling. Like, not everyone's motivated just to make some money. Especially not now.
That's it. And you just kind of want to go in, you want to buy something and just have something there, or you have a friend airdrop you. So, there's a lot of this dabbling going on, and it's not a lot of necessarily serious activity.
It's hobby
Yeah.
and recreational as well, and those
Yep.
hobby recreational activities, I think this is the biggest problem, is getting drawn into the tax net now because of the capital gains tax treatment of the
Yeah, that's it.
crypto assets.
And a lot of what's going on blockchain is very gamified. It's all very fun. So you can get into some really cute, cuddly, interesting little assets and things like that. You can be trading, you can be getting on the GameFi space. But the consequences for tax are real and there. And thinking about if you've got $5, $20, $500 worth of activity going on, and then think about the amount of time it takes to unwind that from a tax compliance point of view. It's really distorted. And so there can be hours spent. And I know if tax practitioners are in the room and have been dealing with this, you would probably appreciate that too, that the amount of time it takes to work it out and for the amount of investment that perhaps is going on, it's kind of that really difficult position, and you're having to charge out a higher rate to get that right. And is it worth it? And that's where any tax reform, particularly when we think about the Board of Tax coming through, really has to be mindful of that cost benefit here.
So we have 25% of the population dabbling in crypto or more, and far more than dabbling, many of them. And we have the tax practitioner
having to clean it up,
to deal with it.
Yeah, and it comes down to
legally viable for them to deal with it because many have experimented with it. So
and the flip side of that,
system.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is if you say, okay, I can't engage with this element, I will outsource that to another practitioner that I know. But by doing that, then it's a problem in itself, because that is an issue of viability going forward. How is that going to aid the credibility of you as a practitioner in a contemporary digital society to be able to continue on into the future? Or is that risking a reduction of your client base? And yeah, as Nola has said, adding in a scam or two makes it all fun. And, you can have the hack to the protocol and all that, that little dabbling can then be, stolen, drained from a particular protocol, and then you've got nothing left. And then it's about proving that, that's happened when and how and if, all those kind of questions. So it doesn't necessarily make it easier.
So what are we to do?
Yeah, exactly.
What are we to do? Are we to spend 10, 15 hours a week studying crypto to understand this? Are we to do it ourselves? Are we to do a course? Will we be wasting our time? Will there be tax reform ahead anyway that is going to create a new asset class and a new set of tax rules? What should we be doing right now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it probably comes down to the individual tax practitioner. So it depends on the client base that you've got at the moment, depends on whether the client base that you're dealing with are just dabbling very lightly, so they've just bought or sold very basic crypto assets, maybe Bitcoin or an NFT, versus getting into the DeFi or actually undertaking business activity. So the level of activity will also differ. So those that I interviewed late last year, there was a range. So we had a range from those that hadn't really heard of it before. Their client base would describe it as, well, what's blockchain? Is it something that's attached to a tractor? Versus those that have got a couple of clients doing very basic things, to those that are fully fledged crypto business focused firms. So there's quite a range here, and it comes down to what your clients are doing. Have you got that leeway to slowly build? When it comes to the PD offerings and things like that, there's obviously the issue of waiting for those very formal offerings from a CPD point of view. They are beginning to come out. We're seeing, for example, IPA doing a crypto day this month, which I'm involved in. So there's the professional bodies. We've seen the Tax Institute do podcasts. We're seeing an increasing amount of activity in the formal PD space from professional bodies or organisations. But then there's a concern over the issues that you're facing would probably be very bespoke. You probably need to know exactly a particular issue, which is really hard to capture within the scope of a formal PD issue. So often it comes down to that self-education and experimentation. So having a bit of a play with what's out there. But the industry, the blockchain industry itself is doing a lot too. So Blockchain Australia, there's CryptoCon in the Gold Coast. There's NFT Fest that my understanding is going to be coming soon. So there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of noise. So you've got to be mindful about the reputable aspects of it. But obviously LinkedIn, talking with peers that are also dealing in this space is a really good way to obviously go through. But just kind of moving on, because I know we're starting to run out of time.
I'm trying to think more about how can we support your efforts towards encouraging tax reform. We can go to all these tax webinars and seminars, struggling with the current tax system, which is not fit for purpose for a digital economy. And really, I think as an industry, we should be getting behind tax reform, and you're leading the way for us, Elizabeth. So how can we help you?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we're certainly working towards the fact that the Board of Taxation is involved in a review of this space. They were meant to be reporting back by the end of the year, but obviously we had a change in government between the Bragg report, the government response, and that Treasurer instruction for the board to undertake that review. So whilst they're going to be undertaking this review, we are awaiting them to be discussing this further with the current government before they actually begin consultation. But they're certainly accepting submissions now, so you can actually email. I might actually go through to a few slides actually, but before I'll touch base back on that Board of Tax element at the moment, and just kind of wrap up some of the key findings here with respect to where we're at with our research. We've already talked to lengths about the complexity that tax compliance is facing here. We've also flagged the fact that there's a risk to the TASA code. But there's an imbalance between the clients and the practitioners in the expertise of their respective spaces. So it can be difficult to reconcile the two. Tax practitioners, probably already realising that there's some difficult decisions that you're having to make about reasonably arguable positions that are, whether they're conservative or whether your client is a little bit more risk taking. Some of you may be really proactive and seeking change and out there advocating it. And I may have been already working with you like Electra here, but then some are waiting for the professions to give advice, and that's okay too. And often it depends on the client base, and that's where it comes back to what I was saying earlier about it depends on where you're at with your clients. If you're you have a client base that isn't really active in the space yet, you've probably got a little bit more time and you can be a little bit more reactive here. And in any case, there's probably going to be at some point you're going to have to do some learning. But the ATO perspective here, it's not just about learning how the tax law applies or can be interpreted, but how the ATO interprets it itself. So it's not just the law, it's about the process of administration, and the ATO being really forthright about flagging crypto as an important element in this year's tax season, but despite that, having so much uncertainty and lag in responses, and we'll get to that in a moment with that reform. So we had the final report that preceded the Board of Taxation's current review that really flagged. They suggested a CGT event or a CGT asset be added to the CGT regime, but there's lots of questions about how that would actually work. The government only noted this and they flagged that the Board of Tax review, so they weren't convinced. But the good thing here is the Board of Tax flagged in regards to this that they're looking to review the broader tax system here, the broader framework. And so that's really important, because if you think about what we've been talking about already, this has implications not only for CGT. A single transaction or a single activity can impact revenue account, capital account, but also things like GST, withholding, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a much broader implication. And moreover, this is across jurisdictional the technology. So we can't just simply limit it to think only about CGT reform. So I think they made the right call here, but obviously we're needing to wait. It's a bit of a waiting game. You're in the compliance season now. You're having to deal with clients now that have been working this space. You've got deadlines to work to, and it's really a challenge here because, like all things regulation, it takes a lot of time, and we can really appreciate with a lot of different, Div 7A, 100A, all these events, it does take a lot. It can be quite stressful. It can be quite challenging to see what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. Residency is another issue. And that seeking of clarity can take time. So that it was only in August, keeping in mind this Board of Tax Review was meant to be to the government by December. I can't honestly see how a thorough review is going to be complete at this point. So whether it will be an extension, I wouldn't be surprised. But it is still on their agenda, which is the important thing.
That's kind of good, really, because we need a bit more time to assess what the issues are and have ideas about where the area of reform could be most effective.
Yep, exactly. And you
so
probably
it'll give us more time to prepare our submissions after tax.
That's it. Yep, exactly. That's it. And just to flag also, the other element of reform I had indicated before was the fact that the Treasurer did announce that clarity would be given regarding Bitcoin as not being not going to be a foreign currency despite the events that have gone on. And I think that's good because there has been a lot of problems around interpreting that and a lot of question marks over this interpretation. So this is at least certainty. It's not law yet, so it's flagged. So at least practitioners can be a bit more conservative and not take that jump and that leap in hoping that they've got a leg to stand on. They've got at least an understanding. But again, it's going to be effective from 1 July 2021, so it's already in a sense going to apply. But when's the law going to come in? What's it going to look like? Are there going to be issues that come out from the way it is enacted? So it's not a complete answer, but it's at least on the right step. And I also noted that the ATO has improved their offerings or their explanations, but certainly there's a lot of nuances, even when it comes to the timing of derivation. To say rewards from liquidity pools or staking revenue that are derived as revenue isn't answering questions like when is it derived, particularly when different protocols operate in different ways. So whilst the ATO is improving, is it improving quickly enough, and do we have the specifics? So often it comes down to the specific issues that CPD is needed here. And so bringing this together, really want to highlight that a best opportunity to really get some understanding here is experience, so playing in this space. And I'll flag the Decentralized Finance Future Learn course. I know it's an RMIT produced item there, but what it is really good at, it's a 4-week course. You can do it at your leisure. I think if you do it, you can do it for free with options to purchase certificate versions of it. But what's in there is video instructions of how to set up a wallet, how to do some staking and things like that with some faucet fake crypto. So you can do it without the real consequences from a tax perspective. You can then do it with some real crypto, and then use a crypto tax calculator to compare your notes about what you've done and how you've done it. So nothing beats that experience. But the informal discussion with peers, thinking LinkedIn, Twitter, Discord, there's a lot happening. There's a lot of people really, loud and noisy in this space, from the tax profession, and they're unbeatable in getting an understanding of the particular issues and concerns. Obviously, the bespoke nature of your particular clients requires you to do independent research as well, being mindful of the reputable sources when we Google and things like that. And I think it was flagged in the chat too, but the crypto day in August that IPA is running is obviously another opportunity that's 100% crypto for practitioners. I've just looked yesterday at the agenda, and it's got, along with me, some amazing names, including representatives from AUSTRAC, Steve Allison, a lot of big names in that. But Blockchain Australia do Blockchain Week early in the year. NFT Fest, I think, is coming. There's a few blockchain industry side events coming through. But there's obviously things like podcasts. As I said, the Tax Institute have done a couple of podcasts in this space. RMIT Meet and Burn often pop up on bringing in the tax space and higher education programs. And just, going back to the tax education, because practitioners, you're often also looking for staff and new graduates, but, behind the scenes, we're working from a higher education point of view to bring that into tax students, thinking about that these are really amazing opportunities to talk blockchain, crypto, in learning these traditional forms of tax principles, but in really novel ways. So, for example, I've been working with with Wiley to help produce a tax textbook for business students that includes in every chapter crypto discussion to try and really bring out the critical thinking for new graduates coming through the system. So it's not just about PD and getting that training as a practitioner now, but trying to get those through the system to be really thinking broadly about how a digital economy really comes and impacts a future practitioner. So they're learning at the same time as everyone else is learning, which I think is really nice.
Stuff we want, absolutely. And could there be there are short courses that we could put our staff into as well?
Yeah. So, for example, again, I know a lot of these things are or not necessarily myself, but connected through the RMIT group. But the DeFi, is a really great intro course. I posted
the link to that in the comments, everyone. It does look like a good one.
Excellent. And there'll be some other ones coming out as well, but there's obviously a few short courses around the place. That one is obviously front of mind from my perspective that I've done myself, but I think there's some really good opportunities, but you've just got to look broader than just the more traditional sense of PD for practitioners. But that probably covers it. And obviously, from my perspective, it's a really important area. And for tax practitioners, really hearing you and advocating for reform and recognition of the difficult position you're in. And obviously, this is not the only difficult position you're in as a tax practitioner, and shifting reform and expectations.
Yeah. So just on this page, I mean, there are various opportunities for learning, but you can't learn it all at once. It's very easy to be overwhelmed. For me to learn this space, I pretty much changed my practice so that I'm only working 10 hours a week in it, because I need the rest of the time to learn to get to where I want to be in a year or two.
That's it.
But not everyone can learn that, put themselves in that position to learn that quickly. But I think continuity, starting with a 4-week course that from RMIT, or there's a 6-week blockchain program with Blockchain Collective, or they might have some new offerings. And this is an era of knowledge sharing, not knowledge hoarding. That's a message I really push with accountants on chain. And so I'm trying to do, by example, a public learning. So make your learning public. If you learn something new, post it on Twitter, post it on LinkedIn, organise a webinar or a Twitter Spaces event with your colleagues. Let's just keep talking. Let's make this our language.
And often when it's new with blockchain, often it's good. The way I got into it was starting narrow, looking at what I've been exploring as a tax practitioner, CGT, for example, and examining that space. So hang it with something that you understand well to begin with, I think, is a really good way to go.
And an area that you're doing. So if you do find something interesting,
exactly.
Have a go at doing it yourself, by buy a little crypto from an exchange, get a cold wallet, practice transferring between wallets, try a DeFi browser wallet like MetaMask, or there are other browser wallets, and just learn how clients are navigating this space, and it'll fall into place. Like, you know, when people started using internet banking, we had to do it to really trust it.
That's it. And there's test nets you can use, so you can pretend to do it, so you're not actually dealing with real crypto. It's essentially pretend crypto, which is a nice way to, you can do it without worrying too much about having a tax compliance issue at the end of tax year, at least when you first give it a go.
Because I was wondering what I'm participating in a test net for a startup at the moment, and I noticed 30,000 stacks. That's a crypto in my wallet this morning. I went, oh my God, someone's given me all this money. I went, oh no, it's a test net. I can just play on DeFi here. It's a new DeFi.
Exactly.
And I'm like, that's a great way to learn. And I'm going to share that in the Accountants on Game group later. So, you know, get your hands dirty and figure out what they're doing. But definitely courses to understand the nature of crypto and what's happening in DeFi, to be able to think, well, what's wrong with this tax law, this tax treatment? Why is this out of whack? What would be the appropriate tax treatment? Like just the example I gave before, where you've got like move to earn, or these sort of gamified activities in crypto that are more likened to a hobby than a business. But because of the asset itself being classed as property, you know, an intangible asset, it's caught up by the CGT regime. So, you know, people who have hobbies are now caught up in CGT, whereas if it was income, we could, I don't know, you know, I think I'm just seeing too much getting caught up that shouldn't be. 18-year-olds.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And you know, it is, and as I said earlier, I have a real issue with the youth, and even younger than 18-year-olds potentially playing their games and that, and you know, with blockchain, it removes those walls of the game, so you can access secondary markets for all those swords, all the gear that you can acquire through playing that game, and actually sell it.
It's not for tax, is it? And so it's kind of opened the tax. Our private world has now been opened up to exposed to tax.
Yeah.
Awkward. So yeah, how can we assist with your survey?
Look, the more people that put in, because that also can play a part in the Board of Tax Review too. So having an understanding of the issues you face, I think Electra's already shared the link, is understanding the issues, and that's my key thing with this project, is really understanding that gap and what needs to happen, and so there's an opportunity to have voices heard in this space. As a practitioner, you're probably in the thick of it, but to varying extents depending on the kind of client base you've got. So there's a lot of issues that you are facing as a practitioner, and that's what we want to know, and that's what can then feed into you know, issues of, for example, reform reviews and advocating. So all that can be compiled in you know, a research output, but also that output has implications too. So as an academic, obviously I'm within that kind of world of producing knowledge and articles and things like that, but I'm very much what's really important to me is that engagement with industry, engagement with you, and that's where I see is that advocating for practitioners and ensuring voices are heard. So
thank you. Because we do need our advocates at the moment, especially for the small tier practitioners. And so you're doing really wonderful work there, Elizabeth, and everyone, I encourage you to go through the survey, but also while you're doing it, take some notes. You know, after November, let's all round up and help each other prepare submissions. Let's flood the Board of Taxation review.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parties working. Yeah, a lot of parties are working on submissions, and so the more we can get to them, the more we can bombard them with the message. I think that will be really positive.
Please make our lives easier.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the chat. Yeah, you can certainly share the survey with tax practitioners. Once it's out there, I can't really stop the snowballing. So that's good for reaching out. So.
And I've recorded this, and I'll write up a transcript, an article from it to share with the article, with the link to the survey, so we can share it broadly. And so Elizabeth and I'll have a look at that before it gets sent out in the next week. Thank
Excellent.
you so much, Elizabeth. This has been
No worries.
great. And just if you can just take it to the very last slide, please.
Yes.
Get some links to reach out to us on LinkedIn, follow us on LinkedIn, participate with us on LinkedIn, have your say on our posts. You can scan that QR code. It's just to Accountants on Chain community, where we will be sharing more events and articles and more in the new year. So keep in touch, and thank you very much. And thank you everyone who came along today, and those who contributed with a donation to Digital Playhouse. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.
Keep in touch and keep this conversation going. Thank you. Have a good day, Elizabeth.
Thanks, lecturer.
See you all.